Hey everyone, and welcome back to Satisfactory News. Before we get into the video, I want to quickly thank you all for the love you've shown to the channel since 1.0 dropped just a couple weeks ago. I've gotten over 2,000 more subscribers, hundreds of thousands of more views, and an absolute ton of comments asking questions, voicing opinions, and having conversations about this game. I'm glad that my guide and news videos have been helpful to everyone, and I hope you'll stick around. Okay, that's done, so let's get into the actual video. Satisfactory has a lot of buildings that are essential. Constructors, manufacturers, coal generators, you need them all. But I've played a ton of strategy games in my life, and there always ends up being a handful of units or buildings that just sometimes don't get used. Are they useful or fun? Sure. Are they essential to playing, finishing, and beating the game? Not really. In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 buildings in Satisfactory that I would consider optional, but are super useful in the right situations. Some creative or veteran players probably already use these to great effect, but if you haven't found a use for one of these yet, I hope that you feel inspired by this video. If you're using any of these buildings in your game right now, it's probably power storage. Power storage is one of those weird items that can be super useful but also super useless. If you plan and build your power generators properly, then you won't have to worry about using power storage. These buildings are batteries that charge from excess power in your system, then they discharge to augment your power grid if you're not producing enough power. These are useful to balance out a grid that is dependent on geothermal generators, which fluctuate, and factory buildings like particle accelerators, which fluctuate in how much power they use. However, like I said, if you build your power generators with enough headroom and they're stable, you'll never actually need to use power storage. However, if it's not stable, it can be very useful. If your power grid is at risk, power storage can give you an advanced warning before a full power loss occurs, which will give you time to fix your grid before it fully shuts down. When in doubt, build a ton of them, because they aren't super expensive to build, especially in the mid-game. The radar tower can give you a ton of information about the map, specifically resource nodes, and they cover a massive range. Hearing that, this may seem like an essential building, but the problem is it's kind of doubled up on with some other tools. Usually you don't need to have instant knowledge of every node in your region, and you can simply use the basic resource scanner ability to find what you need in the moment. If you have a second monitor, you can bring up the interactive map on Satisfactory Calculator and see every node on the map at once while you're playing. One of the big advantages that the radar tower does offer is showing whether a node has a miner on it or not, as well as showing you how many collectibles there are in the area, although it doesn't show the exact location of those. You can also see what species of creature are in the area, which is generally not super important, but it is there. I would say the biggest advantage, honestly, is that it can reveal large portions of the map all at once if you place it down, so it won't have giant black gaps in the map. The Converter is one of the new late-game buildings in Satisfactory, and most players probably don't have it unlocked yet. But it feels like one of those buildings that many players will be unsure of how to use. Essentially, this building converts an ore into a different ore. There are a bunch of conversion recipes available, and they can be used to turn a less desirable resource into a more desirable one. There are a few that I think are going to be super useful though, especially in the late game when you unlock this. Uranium is the rarest resource in the game, and it can be converted from bauxite. Bauxite is also quite rare, but if you're trying to create as much nuclear power as possible, you might want to do that conversion, especially since bauxite is not used in the default recipes for nuclear until you get to plutonium. So this can really help you max out how much nuclear power you can have in your world. I think the 2 sulfur recipes are going to be super useful as well. You can use either coal or iron ore to convert to sulfur, and these are 2 pretty common materials. Obviously you'll need a ton of each for normal factory production, and they take a lot in the recipes, but sulfur is even more rare than bauxite. So if you're in need of more, one or both of these recipes is going to be really helpful. The other one I want to mention here is converting deuterium to nitrogen gas. It's not necessarily a great recipe, but if you're in the desert, there isn't any nitrogen close by. In a pinch, there is some deuterium that you can convert, if you just need a little bit of it. Other recipes will be useful depending on your situation, but I think it's going to get better if you're trying to produce an absurd amount of one thing, or if you don't want to transfer a certain resource all the way across the map. I think there's a big argument for the converter not being good in terms of optimization or efficiency, but incredibly good in terms of convenience and not having to create an entire production line that goes halfway across the map. The priority power switch can be a real game changer to help you organize and control different parts of your power grid. But I already mentioned the power storage, and how if your grid is already set up and good to go and doesn't have any issues, then you don't really need it. The priority power switch is similar in that regard, but I think it's actually a little more useful if you like being organized. Start by placing power switches between different factories and name them accordingly. Then you'll see these power grids and a list in the priority power switch with a toggle next to them. Simply toggle them on or off to determine whether that specific factory gets power or not. Now, like I said, if your power grid is well managed, you don't really need this. In normal gameplay, you don't really need to turn on and off your factories for any reason. But if you're in a game where you do need to be doing that, or you simply want that level of control and organization, the priority power switch is exactly what you need. What's even cooler about it is that you can prioritize your grids. If you experience a power loss, the priority power switch will start deactivating factories in the order you set. So you can make sure your power generating factories and the factories that support them are the last to turn off, which in turn will help your grid come back online faster, or at least give you more time to fix things before a complete grid failure happens. Oh, and the best feature? If you want to manage your grid, you can plop down a priority power switch anywhere in the world and see your entire grid, whether you're connected to it or not. So, do you use these buildables in Satisfactory? If so, do you agree that they're underrated, or do you think there's a reason that people don't use them that often? And do you have any other tools, features, or buildings in the game that you think are underutilized? Plead your case in the comments below and let's see what everybody thinks. And of course, if you're not subscribed, please feel free to do so to see future videos.